NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
So this is fantastic, and we have already gotten off to a wonderful morning. We have the sort of unenviable position of following Sally Yates in her keynote address, but I think we have the enviable and really unique opportunity to sort of set the stage for what I think promises to be a really incredible 2.5 days of learning and sharing and growing and moving forward. This, and I have the luxury and the benefit of some big thinkers on this panel, and I get to be the moderator. And so I think that we are going to try to use this opportunity to really push the envelope a little bit. Sally in her remarks said that she was preaching to the choir, and I think that probably in many respects that is true, but I think that my job this morning is really going to be to upset the choir. My job is really going to be to push the choir outside of its comfort zone and to really give you some food for thought that I hope you take with you through these next couple of days. And the way that we're going to do that is we've got somewhere close to 90 minutes to have really what is going to be a conversation and really what is going to be a discussion. I am a big believer, and where I work in Harlem, we practice participatory defense. And I'm also a big believer in where I come from in Harlem, we practice collaborative defense. And so I really want this to be a conversation that engages you. I am going to, as the moderator, sort of set the stage and then get out of the way. And what I would like, and the way we're going to do it, I should say, is that we are going to talk about 3 sort of fundamental areas when it comes to thinking about collateral consequences, and that is the moral argument for or against collateral consequences, the economic argument for or against collateral consequences, and then to some degree the moderator gets to call the tune. So we're also going to talk about race and racism, really racial disparity, racial disproportionality. And we're going to do that in segments, so we're going to spend about 20-25 minutes talking about the moral aspects, 20-25 minutes about the economic, and then conclude with the racial dynamics. And what I really would like, and also because it was the boss told me, Angela told me that we should include the audience as much as possible. During each one of those segments, we're going to have an opportunity for folks to participate and ask questions. So if as we're talking about the moral arguments with respect to collateral consequences, there is something that you want to say, a question you want to ask, you should just line up at the microphone. And we may not get to all of you, because I do also have to be mindful of the time, but we're going to try to get to at least a few folks in each topic with questions. And these guys really have no, other than those large, broad categories, and we're going to try to stay sort of, at 50,000 feet in our discussion, these folks really have no idea what I'm going to ask, and I really don't have any idea what I'm going to ask either, because I want this to be truly a discussion and an unscripted conversation. So with that, I think that, and also I want to say really, because we have such a incredible collection of folks here, and this really is a unique opportunity. I don't want you to be bashful, and I don't want you to be shy, and I want you to get up to the microphone, and really, if there's something that you want to say or a question that you want to ask, I'd like you to really really do it, because this is a great opportunity. So having said that, I am going to, you all have in your packets the bios of these folks. I'm not going to read their bios. I'm going to sort of very quickly tell you who they are, and then begin to frame the discussion for what I think will be an incredible conversation. First, we have Marc Levin, and that's my Marc with a C, who's the Vice President of Criminal Justice Policy, the Texas Public Policy Foundation Right on Crime. We've got Teresa Hodge, co-founder and director of strategy and innovation for Mission Launch, and we've got Marc Holden, who Norm referenced earlier in his remarks so appropriately, who is general counsel and senior vice president at Koch Industries. So without any further ado, I want to talk a little bit about the morality of collateral consequences. And when we say collateral consequences, sort of just as a working definition, Angelin talked about the work that we did, and I was fortunate to be on the task force that produced the report, Collateral Damage, and we got to go across the country. When we sort of thought about how to define or how to think about collateral consequences, we thought about it broadly. Not just specific legal restrictions that are imposed upon people, but also sort of more generalized discrimination, as well as a social stigma that attaches to a person who is living with a conviction. And so we thought about the definition of what collateral consequences in the bucket that included collateral consequences very broadly. And over the course of the next 2.5 days, I think you should think about that definition, and you might even want to challenge or contract or expand that definition, but I think everything should be on the table in these discussions. So with respect to morality, and with respect to the fact that overwhelmingly, for folks who practice religion in this country, we are a Christian, by and large, nation. And most of us know the tenets, and here we are in Atlanta, and we're going to Ebenezer Baptist Church. And I'll start with Marc with a C. Is there a case to be made? Is there a moral case to be made for the support of collateral consequences in our justice system?
Well, yeah, and I think you just made it. But absolutely, I mean, redemption is central to every major religious tradition, and of course, even people that aren't religious undoubtedly believe that people can change over time, especially if they come in contact with the right intervention, which oftentimes depends on other people helping them find a different life for themselves. So I think that, it's basically like a scarlet letter that we put on someone, and the message we're sending is, no, you can't change. You're always going to be that same person, and you're branded for the rest of your life as a criminal. So, I mean, there's obviously a lot we need to do, but I'd say the first step is not giving so many people convictions to begin with. And we can talk about police diversion, prosecutorial-led diversion, of course, really rethinking what's a crime to begin with, which, we have thousands, over 4,500 federal crimes. In Texas, we found over 1,500 outside the penal code, including my favorite, 11 felonies relating to harvesting oysters. But I mean, that's not what most people are getting convicted of. But the point remains that we arrested someone for an overdue library book. So we really do criminalize a lot of activity. So that's number one. And then number two, of course, is police being able to divert people. Actually, Governor Rauner in Illinois just signed a major police diversion and deflection bill today that's going to really help with that, or yesterday. And then, of course, once somebody has been arrested, really looking at if they are going to be adjudicated and not diverted by the prosecutor, looking at, okay, like they do it in Great Britain, conviction is like a milk carton. It has an expiration date and it automatically goes away. And you can look to Pennsylvania, which just did an automatic record sealing statute that I think is very strong and really groundbreaking. So because you put the burden on someone to have to go file to get their record sealed, they're going to have to hire a civil lawyer oftentimes and file a civil lawsuit. And most people that we're talking about simply don't have the resources and legal sophistication to be able to do that. So we want to make sure that as we're rolling back collateral consequences, we do so in a way that everyone can access that opportunity for redemption to clear their name, and not just those that have a great deal of resources. So there's a huge moral imperative to, I think, basically bring the criminal justice system in line with the principles that all of us say we share when it comes to redemption.
So I want to push you just a little bit on that, because you just very persuasively and passionately made the argument for why morally we should not have collateral consequences. But is there any argument that you can think of that would support, maybe not to the degree that we have collateral consequences now, maybe to a sort of more streamlined, but is there any argument that you can think from a moral perspective that would augur in favor of having some sort of collateral consequences?
Well, yeah, I mean, we dealt a lot with occupational licensing. So, for example, we passed a law in Texas that said you could get a provisional license if you didn't qualify for a permanent license, and provided you were compliant with the terms of the occupational rules as well as your probation or parole. If you were on that, you didn't recidivate with a new offense, it would automatically become a permanent license. Now, to answer your question, there were some exceptions. Obviously, if someone was convicted of a sex offense, we might not want them against a child. We might not want them working in a child care facility, right? So, or insurance fraud, selling insurance again. So, I mean, those things, because there's such a direct relationship between the criminal conduct and the activity we're talking about, I think that. But we've gone way too far. You look, for example, at the sex offender registry. You have people convicted as children on the registry for the rest of their life, sometimes for consensual conduct. And of course, it's been demonstrated the registry does not actually lead to any more public safety. Most sex offenses are committed by people that know the victim and so forth. So, and then housing restrictions on sex offenders, those have been a complete failure. You actually have a place in Florida where they're all living under a bridge or out in a field, and it exposes the public to more danger. But narrowly speaking, there can be some examples of collateral consequences, and if we were going to say that we would never have any, you could worry that that might lead to folks saying, well, these people all need to be in prison longer then, and we don't want to go in that direction. By the way, on Sally Yates, we've actually closed 8 prisons, not 3 in Texas. So, but anyway, I appreciate her mentioning Texas and her excellent remarks.
Thank you. So Teresa, let's just follow up. Marc just laid out some instances where maybe there's a nexus between the offense that someone was convicted of and the opportunity that's denied, in thinking that maybe there is some reason to have a moral argument that we should have some sort of collateral consequences in our justice system. What do you think? Is there an argument in support of collateral consequences, a moral argument?
Well, I think even those of us who have a criminal history are in favor of public safety. And we're in favor of fairness and justice. I think for me, I was realistic. I knew that coming home from prison that I was going to have to work really hard for people to see me differently in my community. I never expected it to be this challenging, however. I was not a person who was marginalized by the institution of family or the school system. I grew up in the suburbs, and so I felt a sense of fairness and inclusion in the community that I was a part of. During the sentencing process, when the judge said you're going to serve, at the time, 87 months in federal prison, I thought everything that was in that judgment and commitment order was complete. And I thought when I came home from prison, it was going to be on me to do the hard work of getting my life back on track. But no one prepared me for the invisible life sentence that's associated with having a criminal record, and just even in the languaging that we use when we talk about someone who has a criminal history. It's othering. It's the, X this, X that. And I even, have offense with returning citizen because I felt like I remained a citizen of this country while I was incarcerated. And I think it requires all of us just to take a few extra steps, add 1, 2, or 3 more words, a person incarcerated. If we lead with human language, then we begin to humanize or rehumanize those individuals who are incarcerated. So I feel like the moral argument is it just doesn't make sense to be in a community and to have people walking around you that don't feel a part of your community. It won't support public safety. It won't support economics. It doesn't support anything. So again, for me, I felt like the redemption process was the day that I was released from prison. I felt like that sentence was complete. It should have been complete. And at that point, the road of restoration, to some degree, laid heavily upon me. But I also felt like opportunities, were going to be available to me if I was able to prove and demonstrate that I was not a risk, for those opportunities.
So you mentioned the social stigma, the fact that people take the word human out of the way that they address you, or think about you or interact with you, and that's part of sort of the definition that NACDL has come to with respect to collateral consequences, in particular the sort of the moral imperatives around it. Talk to us a little bit about that social stigma and what people experience from not with respect to the legal restrictions, but the social stigma. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, for me, it was interesting. My daughter and I, we co-founded our organization, and whenever we were doing the work together, people just assumed it was going to be her father. That was the reason why we were doing all of this work. People would engage with me on a regular basis, but they had no idea that I was the person who was the ex-felon that they were engaging with on a regular basis. And so for most people who are in prison, there is you feel bad. You're in prison, period. And when you come home, when you're engaging with people, there's a level of, for many, where you don't feel worthy. You don't feel like you belong among individuals. And it's felt by the language, it's felt by the job application process, it's felt every step along the way. And in a sense, you are a part of a community, you're a part of a country, you're a part of a society where you don't feel like you belong. And yet, the entire time that I was incarcerated and I was I was at Alderson Federal Prison Camp, the largest prison camp in the United States, the first one. Every woman there, all she wanted was to come home and be an active, productive member in her community. No one was contemplating their next crime. It was, I want to go home and walk my kids to school. I want to go and serve on PTA. And it was all of these things, in many cases, we were dreaming of doing that we didn't even know that we would not be allowed to do. And I feel like if we're going to leave people and saddle them with all of these collateral consequences, it needs to be included in the judgment and commitment order. You need to know, while you're sitting in prison, here are all the things that you're not going to be able to do. Here are all the ways you are not going to be able to come home and re-engage in society. So then at least we could be planning, and implementing the right plan and the right strategy for coming home. It is a tremendous burden. I often said that it was very challenging for me to go to prison. I was scared, I was devastated. Once I got there and settled my emotions, I was able to endure the process. But the worst part was coming home. I had my first anxiety attack after I came home from prison. And it was just the stress of not feeling like I belonged. And so someone said to me once, well, what does justice look like? And I said, I can tell you what it feels like. It feels like fair. We all know when we've been wronged. We know when someone's snubbing us, or when they're thinking something different about us or how they engage with us. And I think that's what individuals who have criminal histories face on a regular basis, is trying to prove over and over and over again in each interaction perhaps that they have, every time they meet someone, that they are worthy of being there, being a part of, and that they belong among the community.
Marc, Holden, is there a case to be made for some sort of a moral case to be made for some sort of collateral consequences to be a part of our system?
Other than what Teresa mentioned about public safety, I'd say no. I'm going to just, Rick, take offense to the whole idea that there's any morality in our current criminal justice system, quite frankly. Good, sorry. And I mean, Brian Stevenson said it best, right? It's a two-tiered system where the rich and guilty get a better deal than the poor and innocent. It's a system where you're judged forever on your worst day. And so the whole idea that there's a morality behind it, definitely not. I'd like to think it's just because people don't think about it, not that that's good. But everything that we do by and large is the opposite of what we should be doing. And I think that we're learning that now, slowly but surely. So yeah, I'd say that from my point of view, the way we look at it, that people who have paid their debt to society, we should honor that. And when they return home, the default setting in all this should be that you get all your rights back, whatever they were before. And there may be reasons not to get certain rights back. There may be reasons, as Marc mentioned, to keep people from certain occupations based on public safety. But other than that, we should let people return as full citizens and not keep reminding them every single day for the rest of their life that, remember that time you did this? I mean, that's what it's like. It's like, I know what it's like with my mom. She brings up stuff still from when I was in high school. And I don't like that. So if you got something like a criminal record, I mean, the stigma that's attached with that, the shame, the guilt, and people bring it up all the time for years and years and years and never goes away. It's just wrong. It's stupid. It serves no useful purpose. And, I grew up in a place where a lot of my friends were incarcerated. I was a prison guard. I've told this story. Some of you probably heard it if you've heard me speak before. And the only difference between me and them is that I think I had parents who probably rode me harder and made me do things I didn't want to do and wouldn't let me do the things I wanted to do. And, quite frankly, I didn't get caught doing stupid things. And if I had, I probably wouldn't be here today. I don't know. So I think our whole system needs to be, completely revamped. And we've seen what works. It's what Sally Yates was talking about. It's what Marc and his amazing group down in Texas have been able to show. The things that keep people from going back to prison are the things that can keep you from going in the first place. It's about having mentors, education, and opportunities, and skills, and someone who cares about you. And so to the extent we want to have a system built on that we give, it should be based on public safety, equal rights, and second chances. That's it.
So I just want to be sure that I'm clear, because this is a great opportunity here. Because there are many folks, I think, when you talked about the fact that our entire system is bankrupt, I think that you found that there was a lot of support for that in the room, and I think that you would also find if you were to say, or anyone were to say, that it probably makes sense that we should think about the abolition of collateral consequences. I suspect you'd probably find some support for that as well. Is that a position you want to stake out, Marc, that we should think about the abolition of collateral consequences?
I think that we got, 52,000, Norman, is that right? Something like that. That shows you, again, going back to the carelessness. We don't know how many federal laws we have. We don't know how many federal criminal regulations we have, we just keep piling it on. I think that to the extent there's a public safety need for someone to not be in a certain occupation, to not be in a certain housing situation, to not get certain benefits, yeah, that should be applied to that person. But Teresa's spot on. I mean, you think you're getting your sentence, and then there's this invisible sentence that's even longer that lasts the rest of your life. I mean, people need to know what they're pleading guilty to. So I think that to the extent any of this is consistent with public safety, we should do it, but it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. That's all I'm saying. I think we have way too many laws. I mean, I could go through the whole system. There's way too much all the way around. So it needs to all be skinnied down. And if there's a reason someone shouldn't be able to have a certain job, certain housing, not be with their families, okay, let's hear about that, but don't make that the setting. You know, it basically, my point of view, what I always understood was people make mistakes, people commit crimes, they come back, we should welcome them back, and then we should help them be able to rehabilitate and become a part of society. It's the right thing to do morally, it's the right thing to do fiscally, and it's just the right thing to do just from a common sense perspective, that you want people coming back better so they're rehabilitated, and then when they get out, let them get back into the game. That's what we should be doing. We should be doing everything to do that, because that is what will enhance public safety and keep people safe and keep communities safe.
So Teresa, it sounds like both Marcs are saying that mandatory collateral consequences make no sense, and that we should not have one-size-fits-all mandatory collateral consequences. But I also think I hear them saying, I suppose they'll correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe there is a case to be made for discretionary collateral consequences, and that on a case-by-case system, maybe there should be some opportunities that are denied to an individual based on the nature of that conviction. Marc, here with a C, talked about sex offenders in daycare and people who have fraud convictions and insurance companies. What do you think about discretionary collateral consequences?
Well, for me, I feel like we have such a bloated system currently, and I've shied away from common sense reform, because then it comes down to whose version of common sense. So it's a very difficult, it's a good question, and it feels like we should be able to get smart folks in a room and come up with common sense reform around collateral consequences. And if we didn't have so many people who we're incarcerating that we're mad at and not afraid of, then maybe we could really reduce. And I was operating off of an old number of 44,000 collateral consequences, only to discover now I have some more. So I'm a little depressed, I have to admit, that I just discovered that there are more collateral consequences. But I do believe, I'm for public safety, have always been. Went to prison, and still, yes, I do believe that I would not want someone who had a sex offense working with my grandchild. If, for me, that makes sense. So I feel like, yes, there are times when we have to protect the public. And we have to also, one of the things that I'm big on is I also am considering, I don't want to put that person in a position to reoffend as well. So with our organization, we have a do no harm policy, and our do no harm is, let us not set someone up who's just come home from prison to an opportunity that they're not ready for. That let's make sure we put all the support systems in place, that we're making sure they have all the right community touch points and so forth before we give them access to this opportunity. Now, for us, that's our version of common sense approach. And so do we have our own internal collateral consequence? Yes, it is, because we want to make sure that folks are ready. And for us, we know that ready means they've come home, they've had community touch points, they've spent, we are looking at the types of crime and the circumstances that we're placing them in. So I do agree with Marc with the C and Marc with the K that there is a way for us to, one, take this bloated system down so that we can really deal with the individuals where we do need to put some levels of temporary sanctions in place while they have an opportunity to demonstrate that public safety is not an issue.
Of course, please do, please do.
And I would say even in these very narrow areas where you might still have some collateral consequences, there should be a number of limitations. So there should be an appeals process, a waiver process that's easy to access, impartial, that can be appealed, and also no lifetime collateral consequences. I think, there's some really great research that shows after 7 years of being in the community without a new offense, a person is no more likely with a criminal record to commit a new offense than someone who has no criminal record. It's really quite remarkable, the desistance research by Sean Bushway and other professors in that area. And then, I think also it should only be when all other less restrictive alternatives are exhausted. So I'll give you an example. Some licensing agencies in Texas, like for plumbers, if you've got a history of burglarizing or, homes, and you want to get into plumbing, you might have to, for the first, year, go with, be with someone else, a supervisor, if you're going to do residential properties. So you can be accompanied for a period, and that enables you to then prove that you're not a risk and eventually be able to go yourself. So I think, and in nurses, for example, who have a drug problem, we have a peer assistance program that helps avoid them losing their nursing license. So there's common sense, use that word again, things we should do that are short of just kicking someone out, totally denying the opportunity.
So I heard Teresa say these discretionary restrictions should be temporary. I heard you say until the person is ready for the opportunity. Marc is talking about the desistance research. Do we have maybe some consensus here that to the extent we believe that for public safety reasons, we might want to, in a case-by-case basis, think about a collateral consequence, that it should be narrowly drawn, it should be least restrictive, and that there should be some ability for the person to prove themselves worthy of that opportunity. What do you think about that, Marc?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay, good. All right.
Let's do that.
All right.
And an easy pathway, I think Marc with the C said as well, to be able to have those restrictions removed. And I think that's important, an easy pathway that is not, cost prohibitive of a person being able to access.
Maybe you should be entitled to a lawyer too if you can't afford it.
There you go. All over the country. So I wanna begin to transition to some of the economic conversation. Does anybody have a question? You can just raise your hand, really, about the moral imperatives. I'm gonna take a couple here and then one here. Oh, you got to use the mic, I'm told. So please start moving that way, and maybe once we get 3 people there, let's call it a. Okay, please, ma'am, just say your name and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ayula Mitchell. My question is, how do we get that information out to Joe public? It seems everyone in the room is likely in agreement to what we're saying, and we're not the ones that need the information. So is it legislation? Is it conferences that don't include us, that include the others? What are solutions to getting all this information out to change these collateral consequences?
Thank you. I'm going to let Levin start with that.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one of the areas we need to look at is also media coverage, because if a business hires someone and then they do something bad, it gets them on the news. And so you've seen a number of reports, and this has happened to even some licensing agencies, where they did give someone a license with a record and then something happened and they got beat up on usually local television news. So providing an alternative narrative about all the people that have been successful who get a second chance. And you're doing that every day. So that's really important. So I would say that, and I guess the getting those people up to talk to policymakers too. I mean, I have legislators, they hear from me at every hearing, they get tired of me, but if they hear from someone who actually was in prison and is now working successfully in an occupation, supporting their family, that really resonates.
Did you want to, Teresa or Marc, did you want to add to that at all?
Agree with everything that was said. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we just got to get the general public to really understand this stuff. It's very complicated. You know, prior to going to prison, I didn't understand it. I didn't get it as well. So I feel like prosecutors, police officers are winning in shaping the narrative of who goes to prison. And somehow it is media, it's the average person, it's business owners to understand. It's the tax argument, you know, it doesn't make sense financially for us to do this. And so for me, I know that's the next segment. I've switched from the moral argument to the fiscal argument and the economic argument, and I've been met with broader success once I did that.
Marc, please.
Yeah. So from my perspective, again, I'm going to just keep quoting Ryan Stevenson because that's never failed me. But it's all about being proximate, right? And so everyone in this room is proximate one way or another, and you need to get that word out there, because if you look at the last, I don't know, we're in the 47th year of the war on drugs, and for the 47th year in a row, drugs have won, but that's another issue, but we're still fighting them. But the reality is the narrative's just been one way for a long time. And Sally Yates said a lot of great things this morning, but one of the things she said that really resonated with me is something I've seen. I've been in a lot of prisons, visiting people. I've met many people coming back, coming home after being incarcerated. And regardless of what generally people think about, you know, just the whole idea of someone who's been in prison, when they meet people who have been in prison or they go to prison, it changes them. And you all probably know this, it changes them. And so you all telling your story and talking about what you do and how you are and how, you know, you've been redeemed, and then going back to the whole idea that just, you know, any one of us could get caught up in the system. I think that those stories getting out are most important. And most, even important more than that, is to hold politicians accountable. I mean, the way that obviously our criminal justice system has grown over the past 30, 40 years, being the tough on crime, both parties have done it. Well, we got to make sure that they understand no one wants that anymore. And I know there are people like Tom Cotton out there that pretend that they know what they're talking about and keep talking about doing more and more of the tough on crime stuff, but that's done. If you want to be president in 1984 or 1988, that's the stuff you do. We're talking about now. None of that works. None of it makes sense. So we need to be louder on this and be more confrontational in a polite and civil way. But that's the key to all of this. And then last thing real quick about jobs and employment. At Koch, we've hired people with criminal records since I've been with the company, which is going on 24 years. We banned the box several years ago. We did it because it's all about mutual benefit and win-win-win propositions. And what we've seen is that people with criminal records who we've hired are among our best employees. They're hungry and they're humble. And you take a risk anytime you hire anybody, regardless of whether they have a record or not, and you have to do your diligence. But what we've learned is that, you know, it's a great source of employees, and it's good for the employee, it's good for the community, it's good for the company. And if you look at the fact 1 in 3 people in this country have some type of criminal record, just selfishly, self-interestedly, as a employer, a global employer, if we were to say we're not going to look at 1/3 of the potential applicant pool, it's stupid. So I think all these things are coming together, and we'll talk about the economic part of it as well in a little bit, but I think these stories have to get out more and more, and you have to tell them, those of you who have been in the system either directly or had been touched by it.
And Angelin just wanted me to make sure that I let everybody know that the NACDL report is coming out in the fall, and that's really another good vehicle and opportunity for discussion and conversation. You should make sure that gets widely disseminated. Nikichi, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Nikichi Taifa, Justice Roundtable. There's been a lot of conversation about the issue of public safety. Personally, I feel that the issue has been overrated. I want to know if you agree with me, particularly in light of the fact that many people get out from under a mandatory sentence. The big guys get out, okay, and those are the little guys are in. Where's the public safety? And that people like Matthew Charles, who was released pursuant to an error, came out, did great things, had violence in his past, was sent back. Where's that public safety? People like William Underwood, who spent 30 years in prison. There might have been violence in there. Is there public safety now for someone over 60 to still be languishing in prison? So I just want to know, do you what you think about the issue of whether public safety has been overrated.
So listen, you get no argument from me on the public safety question. But I do want to give our panelists an opportunity to talk about public safety. Teresa, you mentioned that public safety was your concern, and then we'll go to Marc and Marc Levin at the end.
I 100% agree, Nikichi. I think that it's the reason why I said common sense. Like, it bothers me to say common sense, because then it feels like that's a bigger umbrella or a bigger box for us to create, policies and rules that once again won't make sense. So this feels very complicated, and it feels unnecessarily complicated. And it feels unnecessarily complicated because you're right. When you think of someone like William Underwood, who has been in prison for 30 years, and we know that folks who are in their 60s are less likely to commit and or recommit a crime, then is it necessary? Is the common sense approach to him, would it be to saddle him with more restrictions upon release? And again, for me, the answer would be no in those instances. So I do agree it's overrated, and yet I think that there's a balance that we have to have in this moment of public safety is real. How do we make sure that we are protecting the public and protecting individuals who also have committed crime and making, keeping them safe? And I don't actually have an answer. Maybe Marc?
Let's hold it in and we'll get to you, Marc.
Me?
Yeah, please, Marc. Marc with a K.
What I'd say is that we should do what the states have been doing, and not have, we talked about the one-size-fits-all, the mandatory minimums. I think we should do away with mandatory minimums personally, unless they're actually going to go for the higher level offenders like they were supposed to, but they don't often seem to go that way. But, I mean, example, Texas or South Carolina or Georgia, any one of the states have shown is that what people need usually is an education, some drug treatment, therapy, whatever it might be. And those are the types of things that will keep people safe. If we rehabilitate them while in prison, they come out less troubled, less dangerous, whatever it is. But I think public safety is important, but the problem is that, again, we've so politicized it the last 40 years what that means, from the Willie Horton stuff on down the line. And the whole idea is it has to be based on evidence-based and data-driven practices, whatever we want to do in the criminal justice system, whether it's from bail, whether we let someone out pending their hearing, their trial, all the way down through to when they re-enter society. It should be based on data and evidence, not fear and emotion. And so public safety has just been so abused in the way we use it, and we've locked up way too many people for too long a time in the name of public safety. So we go back to what's happening in the states and how they're looking at safely diverting certain individuals, ratcheting down their criminal code so everything's not a crime. Then those people who have to be incarcerated and be away for a while, they're rehabilitated. And when they come out, they get their rights back and they can get jobs and they can be with their families. That's what we need to do. That was what will improve public safety if we treat everybody in the system with dignity and respect. And that's from victims to law enforcement to the accused, to the incarcerated, their families, and all the communities. That's what public safety is. It isn't about locking people up and being tough on crime, in my opinion.
Please, Marc.
Well, and I would make the argument that actually incarceration in many instances makes us less safe. Basically, if you look at the research on pretrial detention, when someone is in jail for even 72 hours, they often lose their job. As it continues, they may lose their apartment, they lose connections to their family and other pro-social influences. So we actually have very solid research showing people that are released pretrial, for almost all individuals, end up with lower rates of rearrest than those who were detained. And again, the biggest problem, as you alluded to, Marc, is people that can't afford bail, so we need to completely overhaul that system. And then, of course, correctional institutions in this country in particular tend to be criminogenic themselves. And that stems from, in many instances, the way they're run. Well, I do say this country because I toured prisons in Germany, and we could talk about all the differences. But we're exacerbating the anti-authority, antisocial attitudes that some of these people have before they're incarcerated by the way we treat them when they are incarcerated, and then by the collateral consequences, by saying you don't belong in this society. And so we are actually, again, making it more likely rather than less. And then, of course, we release people without a reentry plan in many instances, to without a place to live, without a driver's license or photo ID. So again, the system is actually creating more risk to public safety in many cases.
So I don't want to lose my moderator's impartiality, but I do completely agree that when we talk about public safety, it's often code for something else, and we don't apply public safety evenly across the board by any stretch of the imagination. So thank you for that question. I want to move on to the economic aspects of this, because there's never enough time, no matter how much time they give us. Don't leave the line, because I'll come back to you. But I do want to tee up sort of the economic argument. And Teresa, I want to turn to you. I mean, we understand the numbers of people who are living with convictions in this country. We understand all the restrictions, from licensing to the inability to get educational opportunities, the inability to get educational loans, the inability to establish banking relationships, and on, and the economic toll that it takes. You specifically have geared a lot of your energies and your work in that direction. So talk to us a little bit about the economic challenges and the economic roadblocks, and whether or not any of it makes sense with respect to folks living with convictions.
I've pushed all of my work towards making sure that individuals who come home from prison have access to opportunity. For me, I was an entrepreneur before I went to prison, so I knew I was going to come home and be an entrepreneur, although I had a job and I worked for almost 2 years, saving money so that I could pursue the work that I'm currently doing. And we work with individuals who can't find a job, helping them to create a job, and it's not go start the next big.com necessarily, although some folks have that potential, and that's exactly what they're doing. But in many cases, it's how can you clean enough homes, manage a business, so that you can feed and take care of yourself and your families. So we're a part of this inclusive entrepreneurship movement that includes everyone. And we show up at the table just saying, okay, by everyone, do you mean people with criminal histories? Can you make your table bigger? And that's what we've been able to do. What we realized was we were setting some folks up for failure, because after they went through that whole process and everything, it was hard for them to access capital. And so we shifted our model a little bit, and we started talking to banks. And we just started making kind of the moral argument, and that went pretty far. But then we made the business case of, let us talk about how many people are in your community who have criminal histories, who are interested in accessing capital, and the issue is you really just don't know them. And let us help you understand who they are. And we went from commercial banks down to community banks, and now we're at the CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, and these are community-based banks that are designed to give money at the ground level. And when we made the argument for this population and just really starting to humanize and just let folks know that your local community and economy is going to do better if all of these individuals have an opportunity to work and take care of themselves if they're able to do so. And with that being said, it was just very easy for us to start talking about the moral argument after we made the business case.
And what was the reception? What reception did you get from the banking industry?
Well, we're in conversation now with 3 national banks who are saying it's going to take us 2 to 3 years, we know, before we really fully get and understand how to really engage with this population. But in their case, they explained their ecosystem. And they said, but let me tell you what you need to do. We want to do this, but we give money out of our Community Reinvestment Acts to these CDFIs. You go talk to them because they are mandated to give money at this level. Right. And so for us, and if I can just take a step back, we were approached by a CDFI who said, we want to be very intentional about helping folks with criminal histories, that we're engaging with them. We're not doing it on an intentional basis, but it's the statistic of 1 in 3. So folks were coming into them, but their anxiety was going up. This is the bank, because they did not know and understand how to engage with this population. And so when they came to us and they asked, could you help us vet candidates? We said, sure, we can. And so for us, because we wanted to provide a solution that not only could help residents in Baltimore, DC, because we knew folks in Oakland and Detroit also had the same issue, we decided to put tech around a rubric that we developed. It took us 3 or 4 days to kind of vet one person, and we said, this is impossible, we can't do this, it doesn't make sense. And we've been working a tech solution for the last 2 years. Our tech solution, we just got accepted into an accelerator. We haven't signed the paperwork yet, so I can't announce any of that, but we just got accepted, where we're getting investors who understand the mission of helping individuals who have arrest or conviction records be able to work and access capital. And one of the statistics that I saw was that there's $52 billion that the banks are not accessing. They're not making loans because they don't understand not just individuals with criminal histories, but a lot of individuals in their communities. But I would argue that a lot of those individuals are folks who have criminal histories. And we are finding out, there's lots of stories where, one story in particular, a person had been home for 20 years, had a job, his credit score was in the 700s. He and his wife went to apply for a mortgage, and initially, pre-approval, as they started to dig, his criminal history came into play. Once his criminal history came in play, the bank made him come off the loan, even though he was 20 years removed, had a job, had a higher credit score than his wife, but they allowed his wife to stay on, and they gave him a loan. Well, when you think about economics for his family, they weren't able to participate in the American dream of home ownership at that moment, and the ability to pass on even to their children a home, and all of these other factors. For folks who have criminal history, many of them can't get life insurance because their lifestyle is now considered risky, even though it was 20 years ago. And again, it's the business argument that some of us who have the ability to make that argument have to take it to those industries and let them understand that it's 1 in 3 Americans. You can't, not service a third of this population. But then also we have to help them to understand that, like in our case, the technology that we're working on is to help them to bring their anxiety down so that they can begin to understand the capacity of individuals who have arrest or conviction records and what they're ready for.
That's really great. Marc, Holden, Teresa talked about the business case, and Koch has really put its money where its mouth is when it comes to making the business case and debunking the economic arguments around collateral consequences. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so it's when we talk about criminal justice reform, you heard earlier when Sally Yates talking about who comes in for what reason, and I'm with her. I don't care how you get in here as long as you're in, but conservatives, I mean, what happened in Texas obviously was based on the fiscal issues, right? You look at the costs, and what I like to talk about is that the conservatives come in for the savings, but they stay for the salvation, because that's where the real good stuff is. And so when you look at it, you look at the amount of money that our current criminal justice system costs. There's an estimate that it's $1 trillion a year when you add in all the social costs. We know the hard costs are $250 billion plus for the whole system, all the different systems beginning to end. It's over $80 billion every single year for incarceration across the country with all the different prisons and jails. And that number, the $80 billion, we spend 3 to 4 times more per capita locking people up than we do on K through 12 education in this country every year. So, I mean, that gets back to talk about priorities. You are what you eat. Well, you definitely are what you spend. And so one might conclude we want to lock people up more than we want to educate them. So when you start to unpeel what happens in these different states like Texas and then 34 others now, when they get into office, the governors and the legislatures, and they start to look at their budgets, and they're responsible for making their budgets. They can't do like the feds do and print their own money. When they start to look at the outsized costs for their corrections, that raises eyebrows, and that's where the reforms have started. And that's a good place to start it. And if you look at what's happened over the past 10 years now, more and more states have done it and they've saved money. And they've made, their crime rates have gone down, the prison populations have gone down, and it makes everybody safer and keeps families together. So that's all good. At Koch, like I said, we've hired people with criminal records since I've been with the company. It's the way Charles Koch in particular looks at the world, that there are, especially the war on drugs, the number of people, the over-criminalization of certain behavior, the targeting of certain offenses in certain areas, et cetera. So for us, it just makes sense to get to know the individual. It's one data point, a criminal record in a long life. And it's worked well for us. And right now, I think we are, with all the turmoil in our country, with all the disagreements and polarization, we are at a unique spot. The economy is really kind of picking up, and we're seeing more and more that people are more open to hiring people with criminal records, including people coming right out of prison, because there's a need for it. There's a mutual benefit now. It's not just they're feeling like it's forced on them. And so that is a really good thing, because there's like 6 million plus jobs that go wanting every year for skilled laborers. And so that's very positive. But when you still see out there, though, I think that there was a recent study I saw that the unemployment rate for people with criminal records is in some areas up to 27%. It's still at Depression era levels. So there's still this stigma attached. And if we're really ever going to be able to make our economy grow more and more, we're going to have much more of an inclusive economy for everybody, where everybody succeeds. Everybody talks about that. Politicians talk about it all the time. And the way to do that is truly making sure that when people come out of prison, they're ready to go. They have these certificates, they have skills, they have jobs on the way out. And there's some prisons that are doing that now. We need to do more and more of that. But at the end of the day, if you look at the return on investment from incarceration, John Wetzel, who some of you probably know, the head of corrections in Pennsylvania, really great. I've heard him say is that basically everything is cheaper and more effective than incarceration. And incarceration is the laziest response that we have to most behavior that we want to correct. And so I think more and more of that happening, but I'm just saying that there is so much opportunity out there now, and I think that more and more over time, this is generational, it's going to change even more. And I'd encourage any employer out there to voluntarily try to hire people coming out of prison. We do it in different places. In Texas, one of our facilities hires people when they're still incarcerated, and then when they get out, they get jobs, assuming everything goes right. But more and more, if there are employers here today, I think ban the box is a big deal, but it has to go beyond that. Job fairs, reaching out to people who you haven't maybe reached out to before. We're doing more and more of that, and you find, particularly with individuals who have been incarcerated in the past, are a great source of employment, and it's just one of these win-win-win propositions. And for us, we wouldn't do it if it didn't make sense at the end of the day on the bottom line. I hate to tell you, we're a for-profit corporation, but it does work. So I encourage everybody to try it and do it.
So before we get to Marc with a C, if people have questions, I want them to start now moving to the microphones. And if you're already in line, try to remember where you were. I can't negotiate that, but okay, Angelin knows the order. But start moving now to the microphones, and Marc, give us.
Well, in terms of employment, one of the areas that has always been kind of a place that many people ended up in was construction. And now the head of the North Dakota prison system, Leanne Birch, who's terrific, and she's gotten rid of solitary confinement for the most part, made a lot of great changes. But she said the construction companies went to high schools there to talk about careers, and no one was interested. So now they're coming to her prisons, and indeed in Arizona, they already have trained and have jobs when they left prison with a construction company. Now, the one problem they had is these jobs were on the outskirts of Phoenix where there was no public transportation. So the state of Arizona entered into a partnership with Uber to split the cost of rides until these individuals can afford a car. So, but it's not just employment, right? It's also housing and transportation. We're taking away people's driver's licenses for unpaid fines and fees and a lot of other stuff, drug convictions. So that's extremely counterproductive that we need to change. One of the other issues is we're moving more towards services in our economy and away from things like manufacturing. And we need to consider women and the occupations that they may. We just had a report in Texas from one of our allies in Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. They found almost no job training programs in prison for women. So that's a huge issue. And the healthcare industry, with the aging of our society, there's many specific laws in Texas and other states that exclude people with a record from working in healthcare areas. And it's out of a concern, for taking advantage of vulnerable populations. But we desperately need that part of the workforce to be engaged. So, and I'll just finally say on housing, that's a critical area. A lot of folks can find a job, but they can't get an apartment lease because of their record. We did pass a law in Texas to say landlords can't be sued for negligent, for liability if they rent to someone with a record. I think that's not the only barrier by any means. Sometimes they're intimidated when certain cities have ordinances that if there's too many offenses in their apartment complex, even if they're not by people that live there, they have to hire an off-duty cop, which is basically just a giveaway to the police unions. But these types of things need to be addressed as well, and we need to really make sure that folks can be able to have a stable life, which includes employment, housing, and transportation.
So I can't go home if I don't make sure that we talk about race as a part of this discussion, and I'm going to make sure that we do that. But I do want to take a few questions on the economic aspects of this, and so what I want you to do is just to state your name and ask your question as succinctly as you can, and we'll try to get it answered. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, panel. My name is John Omoke Moses. I'm with the Reentry Project of Coch County. We serve 5 counties. And I have some notes that I take. Obviously, I can't go through all of them.
No, please don't.
I got information. I got calls every day from at least 5 to 10 people through the United Way. And the first question that we hear people usually ask is from a mother or a father or a cousin or a brother says, my person is coming out of prison and they can't stay with me. Do you guys have a place for them to stay? And okay. I have cried many occasions.
Let me pose that to one of our panelists. Anybody
and actually, I wanted to say something to Marc Holden directly also.
Well, do it right now.
So what I wanted to say is that if the Koch brothers, I know you guys are very generous and very kind. If you wanted to do a test pilot for collaborative housing in Georgia, I would like to have an input in that because I have a very good idea that I've written down that for all the programs that are working, we're all working to help ex-offenders. I'm also a veteran. And I get calls from veterans, from the VA, and all of that. So that's my question. But the last thing I want to say is we need a Department of Correction, or do we need a Department of Punishment? When you serve your time, like everything you said earlier, it should be over. Ex-wife, ex-boss, we don't go back to keep punishing people over and over. Is it Department of Punishment or Department of Correction? Got it.
Thank you, sir. Marc, do you want to?
Well, those are great points. I mean, and unfortunately, the city of Houston, about 6 months ago, enacted an ordinance against halfway houses. They did grandfather the ones that already exist, but over time, it's going to have a major, and the mayor is a big fan of criminal justice reform and all that, but when people in these neighborhoods complain that they don't want someone living in their backyard, even though there's no research, right, that it's going to expose them to any greater risk. So I just think that the states need to step in and preempt these city ordinances, because no city is going to say, oh yeah, I want all the people coming out of prison in this state to come back to Houston or Dallas or wherever. It's going to be a race to the bottom unless we say, look, people have a right to be able to live in our communities, and we've got to say as a statewide basis that there's going to be access to housing.
Marc with a K, just because he addressed specifically to you.
Thank you. I'd like to talk with you after this session's over. And one of the, a new group that we started, a reentry program, we think it's hopefully going to be a game changer. It's called Safe Streets and Second Chances. And it's a coalition of Koch Industries, Charles Koch Institute, Right on Crime, Florida State University. We're in 4 states right now, and we're doing a pilot it's in Texas and in Kentucky and Pennsylvania and Florida. And we've got 1,100 people who are going to sign up for the program. Half are going to get what the state corrections give when people are reentering society. The other half are going to get what we think is going to be hopefully a much more innovative approach to reentry. And we're going to work with the local providers in the different states we're going to be in. We're also going to be tapping on Right on Crime and John Kufos, who's one of Marc's with a C's colleagues, who is going to be the head of the policy end of it. So we find issues along the way that are blocks for people being able to successfully reenter. We can lobby and hopefully get those laws changed. But housing's a big issue and a big deal. So I'd like to afterwards engage with you on that to talk about how that might fit into our program. Our whole idea in the program goes back again what Sally Yates was saying. Our goal is for reentry needs to begin day 1 of incarceration, and our goal is hopefully over time, if we can scale it up, we want to be able to be in all the states. We want to have a national database where all the different needs and the different communities, whatever it might be, will be online. And we want to be in a situation where every individual who's going to be returning to society at some point within 60 days of incarceration will have their own personalized plan for reentry. And that's even if they've got 5 or 10 years. So that's our goal. It's a big goal. It's a moonshot, but we're very excited about it, and housing's a part of it. So talk to you afterwards. Thank you.
Fantastic. Your name and your question, sir.
James Wyndham, Louisiana. 2 questions. One, as we continue this conversation about collateral issues surrounding employment, first, has much work or is there work being conducted to look at the TWIC, the Transportation Workers Identification Card issue, simply because in the South, we have a lot of industry along the waterways that prohibit many of our clients from getting jobs because of that TWIC issue. And their denial for that card has nothing to do with terrorism. So we need to look at that, and I wonder, is there work being done on that? Secondarily, also the background check. We need to standardize the background check. As was mentioned earlier, Great Britain has done a phenomenal job at looking at the privacy issue associated with that. What are we going to do to minimize the hardships associated with the background check? And then thirdly...
Nope, that's 2. You said 2. You only get 2, sorry. Teresa, do you want to address any part of that?
Well, I 100% agree that the background check is something that, for me, it is the game changer in the reentry space. That if we can standardize it, but even going beyond that, if you look at, I think it's the Fair Credit Reporting Act that governs the criminal background check. It also governs the credit process. There is a clear pathway for individuals to access their credit report. There's a clear pathway for you to, you know what to do if you're trying to get your score to go up. There's companies and organizations that you can engage with. For those of us who have a criminal record, we don't have those protections. I think they exist, but they're not enforced. And it's just a very complicated process. People don't know how to pull your criminal report and how to navigate and adjust information that's incorrect on there.
Before we, I'm going to let one more person ask a question on this topic, and then you can incorporate your answer into that. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Ponchelis Jackson, Executive Director of Uplifting People here in Georgia. My question is, currently the system is broken. Right now, reentry is a big topic. Many people are touching on it because there seems to be a lot of money and incentives being targeted towards reentry. However, the answers to reentry are with those who are in the system. I was sentenced to 30 to serve 15 here in the state of Georgia for drug trafficking in 2001. After serving 6 years, 1 month, and 11 days, I was paroled. Now, fortunately, I stood up and I asked that judge for first offender status. He looked at my background because I had college education in chemical engineering. I was an honor student, graduated early, and he granted it. And when I went through that prison system, I went to every type of system they have here in the state of Georgia except for the federal prison. And when I would speak to inmates behind closed doors, most people had one thing in common that they said to me. They wanted a chance. And so after being paroled, I got back into the workforce, moved up to management pretty quickly because of my background and not having a felony. And I reached back to the parole officers and probation officers whom had been supervising me and told them if they had individuals who were serious about their life, send them to me and I could get them hired, not only at my location, but everywhere else.
I got to get you to a question.
Right.
My question is, with all of this that we're talking about, how are we going to get the information to the individuals who are in the prisons who want these opportunities?
Got it.
Because they can be your hardest workers if given the opportunity to change.
Thank you. Marc, Levin.
Well, I think, first of all, it's amazing what you've done and inspiring. And, you know, it occurs to me, I just read an article in Oklahoma, 3/4 of people in prison are denying, are rejecting their parole hearing. They're passing it up because we've erected so many collateral consequences, they don't want to leave. That's why it's so good that you were granted that first offender status. And I think we ought to look at a way we can go back and reduce people, if they had a felony, reduce it to a misdemeanor. Utah has a comprehensive statute on that where you can get it reduced after the fact to a misdemeanor once you've shown that, you know, you've been rehabilitated. So, or just clear your record, right? But for some serious offenses, people are going to be reluctant to just seal your record entirely. So, but I think I wanted to also go back on the TWIC one. Most people's appeals are granted when they, this is for working around chemical facilities that was mentioned earlier, ports and so forth, but you actually, for virtually any offense, you're initially denied, and then you have to appeal. So we need to reverse that, and we're actually working with the White House on that topic, but also, while the current rules are still in place, educate people that they can appeal, and that most appeals are granted, again, unless you're connected to terrorism or something, but it's a big dragnet to begin with, which is unfortunate.
So with the remaining time, I want to sort of turn our attention to this issue of race, because I think that without question, and maybe I've got consensus on the panel, race infects every aspect of the criminal justice system. Race infects really every aspect of the society that we live in, particularly in this current day. But with respect to collateral consequences, and the sort of devastating, I mean, there's already devastation in communities of color, you know, wrought by the criminal justice system. But with respect to collateral consequences, which is the focus of what we're talking about here, and we've talked about it in employment, and we've talked about it in housing, and we've talked about it in education, and we've talked about it across the spectrum. I'm interested to hear if you disagree with this idea that collateral consequences disparately impact communities of color, then you should say that. But assuming we all agree about that, I'm interested, because we have limited time, in what you think are the solutions. How do we negatize the impact of collateral consequences on communities of color? And I'll start with Marc with a C and just go down the row.
Well, you're definitely right, and there's an intersectionality. There's been research that shows that, of course, it's very debilitating to have a felony record no matter what, but if you're a black male, your employment prospects are that much worse if you, by virtue of having a criminal record, whereas if you're, for example, a white woman, you would, or white male, you would still have some disadvantage, but in terms of earnings and ability to get a job, it wouldn't be nearly the same, even if you do have a record. So that's reality. I think drugs, which Marc Holden brought up earlier, are a critical aspect of this, because we know races use drugs in the same amount, but arrest rates and conviction rates are very different. And a lot of it, by the way, also goes to whether you can afford a lawyer, which obviously overlaps with poverty and race. And so how your case is disposed of affects the collateral consequences that you experience. So I think that clearly we have to do things like I mentioned earlier, the clean slate measure that passed Pennsylvania this year, which is amazing, because it was a bill by the Republican running for governor, and he did it along with the governor. But it's automatic, so that your record automatically goes away. So it doesn't just mean that someone with money and a lawyer can access record sealing. So I think that's one of the things in indigent defense, strengthening that. I mean, we haven't even dealt with the fact that many people who have these collateral consequences from conviction were wrongfully convicted. That's even worse.
That's something y'all can clap for. Y'all should clap for that.
And
That's right.
so, again, making sure people have a quality lawyer, no matter their ability to pay. And again, that overlaps quite a bit with racial disadvantage as well. So I think that we definitely need to tackle this.
Teresa, talk about race and the impacts you see in your work.
Well, one, I say yes to everything Marc with the C said, and I think that it really comes down to under-resourced communities. People who go to prison often come from under-resourced communities where there's a lack of opportunity all the way around. And I think that to address this, we really have to look at how do we bring resources and access to opportunity to all communities. And so that for me, no people, I agree with the numbers disproportionately. I believe with the harsher sentences when I went to prison as an African-American woman in a federal prison camp, for a white-collar, nonviolent, first-time offense, serving a 7-year, 3-month sentence, I saw it, race play out. And it was in my face. I had, out of 1,100 women, I had one of the largest, I was probably one of 5 women who had such a significant sentence. And there were many of my friends who I was incarcerated with who had similar cases and 12 months and a day, 2 years, 3 years was I think the longest. So it exists 100% hands down. The difference between the women who came home from prison and who were able to get their lives back on track was opportunity. It was the fact that they returned back to resource communities, families that welcomed them, communities that welcomed them, and they were able to get on their feet. Every day I was in prison, I knew I was going to get on my feet because I had a strong family support system, I had good skill sets that I was going to walk out of prison with. I was brokenhearted because I did not believe that many of the women who I was incarcerated with were going to have that same opportunity.
Great. Before we get to Marc with a K, we're going to reward you for your perseverance and come on up. And we may have time for one other question. So if somebody wants to get in line real quick, you can do that. And go ahead, Marc, please. With a K.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I'd just say that what Teresa said. I mean, again, I mentioned earlier I worked in a prison, excuse me, in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is largely depressed area. It's getting better now. But a lot of my friends were in prison, and it was really poor people. It's a place to keep poor people, and that's who goes to prison. And in our countries, by and large, generally speaking, the least educated, the least resourced, and it definitely disproportionately impacts people of color. There's no doubt about it. But what we need are things like you were talking about, opportunities. We need more pre-entry, so people never enter the system, never touch it. None of this is rocket science, because if it was, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. We need better school systems. We need better settings and communities for people, whatever it looks like as far as supports. And we need regulatory reform, and hopefully tax reform will work, so more money, more capital comes back to the United States. And there are jobs in a lot of these communities where there aren't jobs now, including getting people ready for the jobs of the future. So those are the things we should be focused on. And again, unfortunately, a lot of prisons are now focused on that as well. There's one there's probably a million of them, but I'm just going to mention one that I visited this past winter, Handlin Prison in Michigan. And it has a education program. Calvin College runs that, really good program. And they have the children of the inmates are guaranteed scholarships to Calvin College if they want to go there, when they want to go, which I think is pretty cool and really kind of breaks the cycle potentially. And then they have a vocational village where they're training people up for jobs in plumbing and mechanics, electricians, carpenters, you name it. And these people are getting out of prison, they're skilled up, they're getting jobs, and they're not coming back. And some of them are making six figures because there's such a need for these jobs. That's what we need to be focused on. And then hopefully, ultimately, at some point when we skinny all this down from the laws that exist and everything else, we're going to have fewer people in prison and fewer people returning to prison. That's the goal. Fewer prisoners, fewer people with prisons, and just a lot more prosperity for everybody. That would be the goal.
Your question, sir.
Absolutely, yes. First, I want to thank Teresa for being up on the panel and representing. Thank you. My name is Troy Williams. 4 years ago, I was serving a life sentence in California. My question is, we talked a lot today about trying to find opportunities for people who are coming home who can't read, but there's also a wealth of prisoners that are coming home. My last 8 years inside San Quentin, I was a video technician, right? And so there's a lot of us that are coming home with plenty of talent, from jailhouse lawyers to clerks to clergy to you name it, right? How do we take advantage of that population and try to build, because a lot of times we're in rooms and none of us are in the room. We're not brought in the room about the solutions that we need in our returning into society. And I'll just say this, and I know you're gonna tell me to stop, but I'll just say
You
this.
read my mind.
Because when I first came home, I was put in a resume writing class, and I developed a video and audio production program inside the walls of a prison, and was forced to sit in a resume writing class when I came home. That was a total waste of my time. So how do we actually get more of us who have the experience in the room and at the table to develop these programs and talk about what we need?
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yes. That deserves applause. In the interest of making sure we get to everybody, I'm going to ask you to ask your question as well, and then we'll address both of them.
Addressing the issue of race and collateral consequences and economics, here we are in Atlanta, and one thing I haven't heard talked about was voter rights for formerly incarcerated people. I've served 22 years in prison off of a life term. My executive director, I'm Troy Reenstra of Safe and Just Michigan. She's taught me that everything is shaped by policy. As Mr. Holden says, thank you for the plug on the college program in Michigan. I am the inmate who helped form that program, 5-year bachelor's program. So given that 1 of 3 people in this country have been impacted by the criminal justice system, what would the legislative landscape look like? And what would some of these answers to these questions be if we were given our rights to vote across the country?
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, disenfranchisement is obviously huge. 1 in 13, I think it is, African Americans are denied the right to vote, and I think in Virginia and Kentucky and Florida, I think it's 1 in 5. So you're absolutely right. I'm going to turn to each of you to incorporate your thoughts about the questions and any last comments that you have as we wrap this up. Marc with a C.
Well, I agree with all that, and actually, Florida has a ballot measure that's going to be up in November, which would actually be quite modest. It just brings it to where Texas and most other states are, which is once you're, quote, off paper, not on probation or parole, you can vote. But certainly, one could ask why you shouldn't be able to vote even while you're on supervision. Again, it gets back to the idea that you're still a person, you're still a citizen, even though you're in the criminal justice system. And, there's very, very narrow circumstances where you can have your citizenship revoked from the United States government. And so since you're still a citizen, it really makes one wonder. Obviously, there's a lot of historical reasons why those laws are the way they are, but not necessarily ones that can be defended. Thanks.
Teresa, final thoughts, please.
Yeah. First, thank you, Rick, for moderating this panel, and Angeline for inviting me to participate. And I'm going to turn to Troy's question. I think that we have to get funders, foundations, and to really understand that those of us who are directly impacted, we have a solution. And we have an innovation that's possibly missing from the marketplace, and just even in the service providers out there as well. So one, thank you for pushing your way through to get your own innovation out. And I think it's incumbent on us as well, as when we can, that we reach back and we help someone else to kind of have that same opportunity.
Great. Marc, yes, please. Marc, Holden, final thoughts.
Yeah, so on the voting rights, when I said earlier, everyone should get their rights back, that's one of the rights they should get back, just automatically, unless there's a reason not to, which I wouldn't be aware of unless you were convicted of voting fraud or something, I don't know. The gentleman who talked about getting the input from folks who have been in prison, been inside, that's one of the things with that Safe Streets Second Chances pilot I talked about that we're trying to do. One of the things we're doing with the people who have volunteered and been selected, and they're selected by the state, not by us, so we don't know who we're getting, all types of different offenders. We're basically asking them, what do they want? What do they see? We're trying to get them self-actualized, I guess is what I'd say. You talk about people who have not been asked what they want to do, how they want to do it, what are your hopes and dreams and ambitions. That's a lot of what our program's about, and it's trying to build people up while they're in prison and coming out. And so trying to learn from people who have been in prison what they need and what those needs are is something we want to learn about in our program. So if you want to share your thoughts with us, wherever the gentleman was who raised that, love to hear it. And again, thanks, Rick. Thanks, Angeline, for having us up here. I really appreciate it.
So we are, and I know Angeline is happy. I can see. I always like it when Angeline smiles at me. We are going to bring this train in on time. But what I do want to say is, as I said at the outset, this has been a totally unstructured and unscripted conversation, and that's really the way that I wanted it to be. You take a risk when you do that, but I knew that we had these big minds here, and I think that they have really come through for us and have really set the stage for the next 2.5 days and have really given us lots of food for thought. So let's show our appreciation to the panelists for an incredible conversation.